10 years ago, after serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and it ended my army career overnight. I was pretty gutted about this, if I'm honest, because I had a guaranteed career until I was 55. I was good at it, and I've always wanted to serve our great nation. Now, with that label, I could have been a victim. I could have chosen to feel sorry for myself for the rest of my life, but I didn't, because I don't want to surrender, never. So what I did instead was I identified exactly where I was, where I wanted to be, and worked out the steps to get me from A to B. And that's an approach that I've taken ever since. Afterwards, I set up a small little veterans charity to help other people because I thought, you know what, if I can save one person through my experience, that's a win. It's not about mass numbers, it's just about that butterfly effect of connecting with the right person. And that's what's led me on to Nation of Sleepers now and writing a letter to Keir Starmer, asking him if he wants to reconsider his position. You see, already we've had 328 people sign it, and that's fantastic, that's incredible, that's far more than I thought I'd get. And you know what? If we keep pushing this out, if we keep signing it, if we agree, and also sharing it with others, we never know what we might be able to achieve. And actually, sometimes the pen is mightier than the sword. Now, if we want to work out how the hell we've ended up with Keir Starmer in the first place, I think what we need to do is go back into history again, because if we know where we were, where we want to get to, we can understand the steps from how to get from A to B. So, back to 1997. In my opinion, one man commenced a mission to destroy the United Kingdom at that point. And it wasn't with bombs, it wasn't with an invasion, but through ideology, deception and structural change. That man, yes, was Tony Blair. Who remembers that song that he came out on stage with, the D-Ream song, Things Can Only Get Better? Wasn't wrong, was he? Still relevant now. And you know what? 30 years on, with the benefit of hindsight, documents that have been released, admissions and consequences, the real question is no longer, did we know? The question now is, what do we know? Tony Blair, you see, he didn't arrive like a tyrant. He arrived smiling, young, modern, reasonable. And he promised this third way, and it was neither left nor right. But what Britain received instead was something far more sinister. Politics where truth became flexible, image replaced substance, and the power was centralised behind the scenes while the public was distracted with sound bites. Blair didn't overthrow Britain, he reprogrammed it. He didn't reform the Labour Party. What he did was he hollowed it out. You see, the working class were no longer relevant, so they weren't represented anymore. They were just managed because of the union subscriptions. Because what really happened was that national interest gave way to global alignment. Sovereignty was now an embarrassment. Tradition was something that had to quietly be updated or removed. And this was not an organic change either. It was a deliberate repositioning. Britain would no longer be rooted, in its history and its culture. It became a platform. It was open, fluid, endlessly adjustable. And that required consent, which was given without understanding. The most consequential of the decisions made during the Blair years was mass migration on an unprecedented scale. This was never openly debated. It was not meaningfully voted on, and it was never honestly explained. Senior figures have since admitted that the aim was to make Britain irreversibly multicultural. And to top it off, can you believe that we were told to go and fight against Islamic extremists at the same time that this mass migration was ramping up, bringing the same people into the country? The effects are immediate. They've been long-term as well, clearly. We're still feeling them right now. Wage suppression, housing pressure, fractured communities, cultural dislocation. And any time that, ordinary people noticed, they were told that the problem was them. Concern was reframed as prejudice. Dissent was reframed as hate. And that tactic we've seen is being used over and over again ever since. But everything really, really turned a corner when it came to the Iraq War. You see, this wasn't just a war. This was a moment that the British public realised that the government would lie directly to their faces and also completely ignore them. There were millions out on the street protesting against it, but it didn't matter because this is what Blair wanted. You see, the justification, the weapons of mass destruction, all of that dodgy dossier that came out, that just showed how important it was for him to take the country to war, regardless of the truth, regardless of what the people thought. That dodgy dossier, it was not merely exaggerated, it relied on what was called circular reporting, and this is, very much from poor quality sources, and it was known at the time by him and Downing Street. So just to clarify that, circular reporting basically means that The claims come from a really weak or second-hand source, and then it keeps getting repeated around different intelligence channels by different intelligence agencies, and then fed back into the cycle, so that official site assessments can say that it's been corroborated multiple times, but it's all been corroborated by the same source, by the same unverified information that's been echoed back and forth, and then it becomes verified, it becomes truth, it becomes fact. In plain terms, the intelligence repeating itself until it became proof. And that infamous 45-minute claim was presented not as speculation, but as fact. And that was enough to send us into the Iraq War. It wasn't an intelligence failure, it was an intelligence manipulation. But Blair didn't act alone. Behind him stood two men. There were many more, but there was two key men who understood power not as service, but as control. They were Alistair Campbell and Peter Mandelson. Now, if you want me to, I can talk about both of them separately in depth. But in a nutshell, Campbell, who now presents himself as this voice of reason, was a bulldog and a bully. And Mandelson, known as the Prince of Darkness, well, he was best mates with Epstein, so enough said. And against this backdrop of all of this intelligence manipulation, there was a Dr. David Kelly. Kelly wasn't a campaigner, he wasn't political, he was a weapons inspector and a scientist. And he stated what he knew to be true. Iraq posed no imminent threat. The intelligence was being overstated, and this dossier, which became the dodgy dossier, did not reflect reality. And he was right. And then it was leaked to the BBC. And when they identified that he was the likely source, he was exposed, hauled before parliamentary committees and publicly humiliated and definitely put under immense pressure. Shortly afterwards, he was found in a little lane near his house, dead. The official ruling was suicide, but serious questions have, never gone away. He had a blunt penknife, there was minimal blood loss, on the ground around him, there was no fingerprints, there was medical disagreement over the method, and a rapid, tightly controlled inquiry. There's no legal ruling of murder, but there's absolutely no public confidence that that's what happened. But what is beyond dispute is this: David Kelly was correct. The threat was exaggerated. Blair and his inner circle knew the intelligence was weak, but the war went ahead anyway. Truth did not protect him. Iraq shattered something fundamental in Britain. After Iraq, people stopped trusting, most people stopped trusting the government. Whistleblowers certainly learnt to stay silent. Journalists learnt where the lines were. Politicians learned they could lie and they could get away with it. And that lesson has shaped everything that's followed since. The expansion of surveillance, the normalisation of emergency powers, behavioural control, and rule by experts. The architecture of control was built during the Blair years, and he was at the helm. Now, even after he left, he never really left. He simply changed role. And he's now like this, global wanderer with the Tony Blair Institute. He advises governments around the world, promotes digital identity systems, pushes data centralisation and advocates for technocratic governance. He now is unelected, unaccountable, yet very deeply embedded in modern policymaking. This is power without responsibility, the most dangerous kind. And you can see the influence that he has on Starmer. Where did this idea for digital ID come from if it wasn't from Blair? Because in the background, he was championing it like a little parrot. But looking back over this, 30-year period, what do we now know? We know Britain was fundamentally reshaped without consent. We know truth was sacrificed for policy. And we know a war was sold on manipulated intelligence. We know dissent was punished, surveillance was normalised, sovereignty was weakened, and the same architects still exert influence today. This was not chaos, it was design. Tony Blair did not destroy Britain in a single act. He changed the rules, the culture, and the relationship between the people and power. Once those foundations were altered, everything else has followed. And he did not just lie to take the country to war, he taught the system how to lie permanently. The question now is not what Blair did, the question is why we're still living in the world that he built, rather than waking up and returning to how we should be.